It was the kind of day that was supposed to feel ordinary, the kind where sunlight filtered through the trees in soft golden beams, and the air was crisp with a hint of autumn. Yet, everything about this particular day felt different, as if something big was waiting to happen, something that could change the course of everything I had ever known. I sat in the large, grandiose living room of my family's mansion, surrounded by people who, for the most part, I barely knew. The lawyer, a stiff man in his late 50s with thin glasses perched on his nose, shuffled papers at the front of the room. His expression was as neutral as a stone, his voice even quieter than usual, as if he were afraid to disturb the atmosphere. The walls of the mansion felt like they were closing in on me, heavy with anticipation. Every creak of the floorboards seemed to echo, reverberating in the air, amplifying the silence that had settled over the room. My parents sat beside me, their eyes fixed on the lawyer. They had always taught me to be patient, to wait for things to unfold in their own time, but today was different. My parents, who usually held themselves with such poise, were nervous. I could feel the tension radiating from them like a storm waiting to break. My mother, a woman who had always been dignified and elegant, twisted a small gold bracelet around her wrist, her eyes darting nervously from the lawyer to me. She looked so much older than her years in that moment, the fine lines of age deepening under the strain of whatever was about to happen. My father, on the other hand, sat stoically, his jaw clenched tight, as if he were trying to keep something from escaping. And then there was Sarah, my older sister. She sat across the room from me, her head held high, her posture perfect as always. She had always been the one to excel, to stand out in a crowd. Whether it was in school, at work, or in life in general, she was the one who got attention. The one who could do no wrong. I had always been the quiet one, the one who stayed in the background, quietly observing while everyone else lived out their stories. But Sarah was different. Today, though, Sarah's face was twisted with an emotion I couldn't quite place. It wasn't the joy I expected from someone about to inherit a fortune. It wasn't the elation of knowing that all of her hard work and determination would finally pay off. No, there was something darker in her eyes. Something that hinted at a fear I couldn't understand. The lawyer's voice cut through my thoughts, bringing my focus back to the moment. "To my beloved daughter, Sarah," he began, his voice deep but emotionless, "I leave a sum of $10 million to help you live comfortably and pursue your dreams. May this wealth bring you the happiness you deserve." The room seemed to hold its breath for a split second, and then it happened. Sarah's face lit up in a smile so wide, I almost thought it might crack her face in half. She stood up so quickly that her chair scraped loudly against the polished floor, drawing everyone's attention. My parents, without missing a beat, stood up as well, and I watched as they enveloped Sarah in a tight, emotional embrace. I saw tears fill her eyes as she whispered her thanks to them, her voice breaking with gratitude. It should have been a moment of pure joy, and for Sarah, it was. But for me, the happiness felt hollow. I felt a bitter knot twist in my stomach as I sat back in my seat. The truth was, I had always known this day would come. My parents had always made it clear that Sarah was the golden child, the one they had high hopes for, the one they had always believed would succeed. I had been content with that, knowing my place in the family. But as I sat there, watching Sarah receive what was rightfully hers, I couldn't help but feel a sense of injustice rise within me. I had never asked for attention, never begged for approval. But today I wanted something. I wanted to feel important. The lawyer continued reading, but my mind was elsewhere. The soft murmur of voices faded in the background as I slipped into my own world. I knew it wasn't right to feel resentful, especially when Sarah had worked hard to earn her place in the family. She had always been ambitious, driven, focused. She had the world at her feet, or so it seemed. And yet, as I watched her with my parents, a strange feeling began to grow inside of me. A sense of longing, a yearning for something I couldn't name. The lawyer finished reading the will, and everyone in the room began to stand, exchanging polite words. My parents were still embracing Sarah, congratulating her, proud of their daughter's accomplishments. It should have been a happy moment. But all I could think about was how, despite all the years of work I had put into proving myself in my own quiet way, I had always been overlooked. The sound of footsteps broke my reverie. Grandpa was walking into the room. Everyone went silent. Grandpa, the patriarch of the family, had always commanded attention without saying a word. His presence alone filled the room with an air of authority, and when he entered, it was as though everything else faded into the background. Grandpa was a man of few words, but when he spoke, everyone listened. His deep-set eyes were always watchful, always calculating. He was a man who had lived through decades of triumphs and losses, who had seen the world change in ways no one could have imagined. He was the kind of man who had seen it all. And yet, despite all of that, he had a softness about him that no one could quite explain. It was a softness that was hidden beneath the hard exterior he wore like armor. He stood there for a moment, surveying the room. Then, without a word, he motioned for the lawyer to continue. The lawyer hesitated for a moment, obviously not sure whether Grandpa was going to speak. But Grandpa's sharp, commanding gaze settled on him, and the lawyer immediately began to shuffle papers. There was no room for hesitation in Grandpa's world. And then it happened. Grandpa spoke. "To my grandchild," he began, his voice deeper than usual, every word deliberate and measured. He paused, as if savoring the moment. "I leave $90 million. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. $90 million. For me. The room froze. For a second, I thought I had misheard him. $90 million? I looked around at the stunned faces of my parents, Sarah, and the lawyer. Everyone in the room was staring at me, their expressions a mix of disbelief and shock. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. $90 million. What did that even mean? Before I could process it, Grandpa's voice broke through the silence. And I want you to remember one thing, my dear, he said, his eyes locking with mine. Shut up and listen. The room remained suspended in an eerie silence after Grandpa's words. His gaze never left me, his sharp eyes cutting through the tension that had suddenly gripped everyone. I could feel every person's stare, their disbelief mingling with confusion and jealousy. My parents, who had been elated just moments before, now seemed unsure how to react. Sarah, too, stood frozen, her wide eyes fixed on me. For a brief moment, it was as if the world had stopped turning. I felt the weight of Grandpa's eyes pressing down on me. His words echoed in my mind like a mantra. Shut up and listen. What did he mean by that? What was happening? I had always been the quiet one, the one who avoided the spotlight. Why then had Grandpa singled me out in this way? Sarah's smile had faltered, the joy from earlier quickly replaced with an emotion I couldn't quite place. The $10 million she had just been gifted no longer seemed like enough. Not compared to the vast fortune I had just inherited. I saw the jealousy flicker in her eyes, hidden beneath her otherwise composed exterior. This was not part of the plan. She had always been the favored one, the golden child, the one whose every move was met with praise. And now, with a single declaration, Grandpa had shifted everything. My parents, too, were visibly shaken. They had always been so careful with how they presented themselves, maintaining an image of grace and control. But now I could see the cracks in their facade. My mother's grip on her purse tightened, her fingers turning white from the pressure. My father's lips were drawn tight, his brow furrowed in disbelief. I had never seen them like this before, vulnerable, exposed, and uncertain. For the longest time, no one spoke. It felt as if the air had thickened, making it hard to breathe. I could hear the faint hum of the mansion's old pipes in the background, but it was nothing compared to the cacophony of thoughts racing through my head. $90 million. The number repeated over and over, becoming louder in my mind. I had never dreamed of having that much money. I hadn't even known that Grandpa had the kind of wealth to give away. And yet there it was, a fortune that now belonged to me. Grandpa, however, didn't seem fazed by the shock around him. He simply stared at me, waiting. His silence was deafening. I wanted to ask him why, to demand an explanation for such an incredible gift. But there was something about his presence that made me hesitate. It was as though the very air around him was charged with authority, commanding respect, demanding silence. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Grandpa spoke again. His voice was deep and steady, but there was a hint of something darker underneath, something I hadn't noticed before. I've watched you, my grandchild, he began, his eyes never leaving mine. You've always been the one to stay in the background. You don't seek the attention of others, and yet, you carry yourself with a quiet strength. You never boast, never flaunt what you have. You're different from everyone else. I didn't know how to respond. His words felt like both a compliment and a reprimand. Yes, I had always been the quiet one, the one who didn't fight for recognition. But I didn't know if that was truly something to be praised. I see something in you, Grandpa continued, his gaze softening slightly. You're not like your sister. She's always chasing after the next thing, trying to prove something to the world. But you are content with who you are. And that's rare. I had never realized that Grandpa had been watching me so closely. I had always assumed that I was invisible to him, that my quiet nature had made me unremarkable in his eyes. But now, I felt like he had seen through all of my facades. He knew me in a way no one else did. And yet, I couldn't understand why he thought I deserved such a vast fortune. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, feeling exposed. I wasn't used to being the center of attention, especially not in this way. My parents still hadn't said anything. They were too stunned to speak. But I could see the anger rising in their eyes. They were furious, their pride wounded by Grandpa's decision. Don't mistake my silence for weakness, Grandpa added, his voice dropping into a lower register. I have my reasons, and I know what I'm doing. The lawyer, who had been standing off to the side, took a step forward, clearing his throat. His presence was a sharp contrast to Grandpa's, almost too formal for the moment. Sir, he began hesitantly, should we proceed with the details of the estate? But Grandpa waved him off with a dismissive gesture. Not yet. This moment isn't about legalities. He turned back to me. You'll have everything you need. But first, you need to understand that money isn't everything. It can buy you comfort, yes, but it can't buy you happiness. It can't buy you love, and it can't buy loyalty. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Grandpa's words carried a weight that I couldn't ignore. Was this a warning? A lesson in humility? Or was he testing me in some way? I glanced at Sarah, and for the first time, I saw her clearly. Her perfect facade was cracking. She was no longer the confident, poised woman I had always admired. She was vulnerable, shaken to the core. The very thing she had worked so hard for had slipped out of her grasp in an instant. I watched as Sarah looked back at me, her face a mixture of shock, disbelief, and something else, resentment. The jealousy was unmistakable now. She had always been the center of our parents' world, their pride and joy. But now, it was as if the universe had decided to upend everything. The fortune that was supposed to be hers was now mine. And I could sense that she hated me for it. I didn't know how to respond to Grandpa. The money, the legacy, it was all so overwhelming. And yet, amidst the chaos, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of peace. Despite the tension, despite the way the world seemed to be turning upside down, there was a part of me that understood. Grandpa had given me this gift for a reason. He believed in me, even if I didn't fully understand why. Grandpa stood up, the power in his presence undeniable. "The money is just the beginning," he said, his voice filled with finality. "What you do with it is what will define you." With that, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. The room remained still for what felt like hours. No one moved. No one spoke. And then, finally, it was Sarah who broke the silence. "I don't understand," she muttered, her voice trembling with frustration. "Why did he choose you? Why not me? I've worked my whole life for this." Her words were sharp, filled with the sting of betrayal. It wasn't just about the money, it was about something deeper. Something that I couldn't fully comprehend, but I could feel in my gut. She had always been the one to strive for approval, to meet every expectation. And now, the one thing she had been certain would be hers had slipped away. "I don't know," I whispered, my voice barely audible. But the truth was, I didn't know why Grandpa had chosen me. I didn't know what I had done to deserve this. I just knew that everything had changed, and I had no idea how to navigate this new world that had been thrust upon me. The days that followed Grandpa's while reading were a blur of confusion and uncertainty. The mansion, once filled with the sound of laughter and conversation, now felt like a mausoleum. The walls, which had always been a silent witness to our family's celebrations and gatherings, seemed to close in on me. The once familiar spaces felt cold, empty, as though the warmth had been drained out of the house along with Grandpa's sudden departure. I spent the next few days in my room, unable to shake the feeling that my life had just been upended in ways I couldn't yet understand. Grandpa's words, "Shut up and listen," echoed in my mind constantly. What had he meant by that? Why had he left me, of all people, $90 million? At first, I thought it might have been some sort of test. Perhaps he was trying to see how I would react to the sudden wealth, testing my character. But then, as I sat alone in the stillness of my room, I began to wonder if it was more than that. Was there something he hadn't told me? Some piece of the puzzle that I was missing? I couldn't go to my parents. They were just as bewildered as I was. My father, once the epitome of control, now walked around the house with a frown permanently etched on his face. He avoided me, as though he didn't know how to handle the situation. My mother, on the other hand, was too busy making phone calls and trying to arrange meetings with lawyers to pay attention to anything else. And Sarah had been distant, cold even. I had expected her to be angry, to lash out at me, but instead, she had become quiet, withdrawn. She no longer came to dinner, no longer sat with the family. It was as though she had retreated into herself, burying whatever emotions she was feeling beneath a thick shell of silence. Every time I saw her, my heart ached. I had never meant for this to happen. I didn't want to take anything away from her. She had worked so hard for everything she had, and now, everything had changed. But the truth was, I had no idea why Grandpa had chosen me. It was like a twisted game of fate, and I had been the one dealt the winning card. The wealth, which should have been a blessing, now felt like a heavy burden. Each time I thought about it, my stomach churned. I didn't want it. I didn't want the responsibility, the expectations, the guilt that came with it. I just wanted things to go back to the way they had been before. One evening, after days of avoiding each other, Sarah finally came to my room. The knock on my door was soft, hesitant, almost as though she was unsure of whether or not I would let her in. When I opened it, she stood there, her face pale and drawn. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I stepped aside, allowing her to enter. She didn't sit down, just stood near the window, her back to me. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Finally, she spoke. "I don't understand," she said, her voice breaking. "Why you? Why did Grandpa leave you that money?" I didn't know how to respond. There was so much I wanted to say, but the words felt inadequate. Instead, I simply shrugged. "I don't know, Sarah. I honestly don't." She turned to face me then, her eyes searching mine for some kind of answer. "You don't know? You don't know why he chose you?" There was a bitterness in her voice, something raw and angry. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her gaze on me. "No, I don't. I don't understand it either. But I can't change it." Sarah laughed, but it wasn't a laugh of humor. It was a bitter, hollow sound. "You don't understand it? I spent my entire life working to please everyone, especially Grandpa. I followed all his rules, did everything he asked, and now you get everything." Her words hit me harder than I expected. The truth was, I had always known Sarah's struggle. She had been the perfect daughter in everyone's eyes, the one who could do no wrong. She had worked tirelessly, often to the point of exhaustion, to gain Grandpa's approval. But despite all her efforts, she had never been the one to receive his final blessing. "I never asked for this," I whispered, feeling a tightness in my chest. "I didn't ask for the money. I didn't want it. But Grandpa, he made his choice." Sarah's eyes softened for a moment, but the anger quickly returned. "I've worked so hard for this family. And you get everything without even trying." I could feel the tears welling up in my own eyes now. "I didn't choose this, Sarah. I didn't want to hurt you." She took a step forward, her eyes narrowing. "I'm not hurt, I'm angry. You took something that was mine, something I thought was always going to be mine. Her words stung, but I knew there was truth in them. She had spent her whole life striving to be the best, to win approval, and now, with one swift move, it had all been stripped from her. She had worked for the recognition, the legacy, and in an instant, it was all taken away. I wanted to reach out, to apologize, to fix it somehow. But there was nothing I could say that would make it right. Nothing could undo what had already been done. For the next few days, Sarah withdrew even further. She spent her time locked in her room, refusing to talk to anyone. My parents, too, seemed distant. My father was more irritable than usual, snapping at the smallest things. My mother was constantly on the phone, working with the lawyers to figure out what would happen next. The atmosphere in the house grew tense, and I couldn't escape the feeling that something was coming. Something worse than the silence that now hung over us all. But then, just as I was starting to think that things couldn't possibly get worse, the first letter arrived. It was addressed to me in bold, sharp handwriting that I didn't recognize. I tore it open, my heart pounding in my chest. The contents were simple, but the words were like a punch to the gut. You don't deserve this money. Your grandfather made a mistake. There are things you don't know, things you haven't been told. Be careful, because there are forces at work here that you won't understand. This is only the beginning. The letter was unsigned, but it didn't matter. The warning was clear. Someone knew something. Someone was out to make sure that I didn't get away with this. I stood frozen, the letter trembling in my hands. Who could have sent this? And why? For the first time since Grandpa's will reading, I felt a cold chill run down my spine. This wasn't just about family anymore. It was something much darker. The letter haunted me. The words were simple enough, but they felt like a curse. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. It wasn't just a letter, it was a warning. And it had come at the most unsettling time, when everything in my life was already turned upside down. Who could have sent it? Why did they think I didn't deserve the money? For days, I couldn't bring myself to tell anyone about the letter. I didn't want to worry my parents further. They had enough on their plates, trying to figure out what Grandpa had left behind, dealing with the lawyers, and handling the mounting tension within the family. But I couldn't ignore it. The letter felt like an omen, a message from someone who knew something that I didn't. It was a Sunday evening when everything came crashing down. I had been sitting in the living room, staring at the fireplace, my mind a million miles away, when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and my first instinct was to ignore it. But the sound of the bell echoed through the house, pulling me out of my thoughts. I stood and walked slowly to the door, my heart pounding in my chest for reasons I couldn't understand. When I opened it, I was met with the last person I expected to see. It was Sarah. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed from what looked like hours of crying. She didn't say a word, just stood there, looking at me with a mixture of guilt and anger in her gaze. I felt a knot form in my stomach. Something had changed. She was different. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, stepping aside to let her enter. She walked past me, her movements stiff, almost mechanical. I closed the door behind her, unsure of what to say. The silence between us was thick, uncomfortable, like the weight of everything that had happened was pressing down on both of us. She didn't sit down immediately, just stood there, staring at the ground. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke again. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I've been terrible. I don't know what came over me. I didn't know how to respond." My sister, always so strong, so composed, was now standing in front of me, vulnerable, her emotions spilling out. It was hard to reconcile the person she had been with the one in front of me now. "Sarah, you don't have to apologize. I understand why you're upset," I said quietly, my own heart aching at the sight of her brokenness. I didn't want any of this to happen. She shook her head, wiping away the tears that had begun to fall. "No, it's not just that. I've been holding something in for years. Something I've never told anyone." Her voice wavered, and I could see the pain behind her eyes. I stepped forward, confused. "What are you talking about?" She took a deep breath, as if trying to steady herself, and then spoke in a low, almost inaudible voice. Grandpa didn't just leave you the money because of who you are. He left it to you because of something I did." I froze. My mind raced, but the words I had been expecting never came. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "When I was younger, I made a terrible mistake. I betrayed Grandpa's trust." I felt my stomach drop. Betrayed Grandpa's trust? The man who had always been so proud of her, who had trusted her with everything, had been betrayed? The idea was unthinkable. "What did you do?" I asked, my voice barely audible. The room felt suddenly too small, as though the walls were closing in around me. "I didn't mean to, but I did it anyway," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "Years ago, Grandpa had entrusted me with something very important, his business records, his personal papers. They were locked away in a safe, and I was the one who had the key. He wanted me to protect them, to keep them safe. But one day, I made a stupid decision. I took those papers. I didn't destroy them, but I kept them hidden. I was young, and I thought I could use them to get ahead, to gain his favor. But I was wrong." My heart pounded in my chest. The magnitude of what she was saying was overwhelming. Grandpa had trusted Sarah with something so important, and she had betrayed that trust. I never told anyone, she continued, her voice barely a whisper. But Grandpa knew. He found out. And he never forgave me for it. I was speechless. I had always seen Sarah as the perfect daughter, the one who could do no wrong. But now, everything I had known about her seemed to be unraveling before my eyes. And that's why he left you the money, Sarah said, her voice cracking. He knew I could never be trusted with it, not after what I did. I didn't know how to process what she had just confessed. The betrayal, the guilt, the weight of it all, it was too much to bear. But I knew one thing for certain. Grandpa had left me the money not just because of who I was, but because of the mistakes Sarah had made. I felt a pang of sympathy for her. Despite everything, she had been my sister, and seeing her like this, broken and regretful, hurt more than I had expected. I didn't know, Sarah. I never knew any of this, I said, my voice filled with compassion. But you have to understand, this wasn't my choice. Grandpa made his decision. But before I could finish, Sarah interrupted me, her voice filled with frustration. I know. It's not your fault. But it's hard, okay? It's hard to see everything I worked for slip away, to know that Grandpa thought I wasn't good enough to handle it. He never told me why he chose you. But now I see it. He knew what I did. The words stung, but I didn't blame her for feeling this way. The guilt that had weighed on her for years had finally come to the surface, and now she was left with the burden of it all. I don't know what to say, I said, my own heart aching. But Sarah, you don't have to carry this alone. She shook her head, tears flowing freely now. I've already lost everything. I've lost his trust. And now, I'm losing you too. I reached out, gently pulling her into a hug. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We just held each other, both of us grieving the loss of something we hadn't fully understood until it was too late. The next few days felt like a whirlwind, my world spinning faster than I could keep up. Sarah's confession had shaken me to my core, but it also brought a strange sense of clarity. I finally understood why Grandpa had left me the money, and why Sarah had been so distant and conflicted. But there was still so much I didn't know, so many questions left unanswered. Why had Grandpa kept this secret from everyone for so long? What did he expect me to do with this vast inheritance? I couldn't stop thinking about the letter. The anonymous one that warned me of forces at work, forces I couldn't yet understand. Whoever had sent it knew something important. But what was it? And why was it so important that I be careful? I spent the next few days digging through Grandpa's personal belongings. It wasn't an easy decision, but I felt an overwhelming need to uncover the truth. The more I searched, the more I realized how little I truly knew about him. Grandpa had been a private man, keeping his personal affairs tightly guarded. I had never asked questions, never thought there was anything worth knowing beyond what he had allowed us to see. But now everything felt different. I started with the study, Grandpa's favorite room in the house. It was a place of quiet reflection, filled with books, papers, and old photographs. The walls were lined with shelves, each one stacked with family history, old legal documents, and business contracts. It felt like a museum of his life, each item a relic of a time long gone. I pulled open the drawers of his desk, one by one, hoping to find something, anything, that might shed light on the mysteries surrounding his decision. It was then that I found it. A small, worn envelope, tucked beneath a stack of old receipts. The envelope was plain, with no markings or address, just a simple, faded seal that had long since lost its color. My heart skipped a beat as I carefully opened it. Inside, there was a letter, written in Grandpa's distinctive handwriting. The letter was dated just a few months before his death, and the words inside were like a punch to the gut. To my dear grandson, I hope this letter finds you well. By the time you read this, I will be gone. There are things you must know, things that no one else can tell you. Sarah made a grave mistake, one that has haunted her for many years. But it is not just her mistake that concerns me. There are people who would do anything to see our family fall, and you must be prepared for what's coming. The money I leave you is not a gift, it is a responsibility. It is a legacy, one that must be protected at all costs. There are forces at work that you cannot yet comprehend, but trust me, they will reveal themselves soon enough. I read the letter over and over, my hands trembling as the words sunk in. Grandpa had known something. He had been aware of the danger that surrounded our family, and he had been preparing me for it all along. But what was this legacy he spoke of? And who were the people that wanted to destroy us? The letter only deepened the mystery. I felt more confused than ever, but at least I had some answers. Grandpa had known about Sarah's betrayal, but he had also known about something much bigger, a threat that loomed over all of us. It was then that I heard a knock on the door. I quickly shoved the letter back into the envelope, hiding it before anyone could see. When I opened the door, I found my mother standing there, her expression unreadable. "You need to come downstairs," she said, her voice strained. "Your father wants to talk to you." I followed her downstairs, my mind racing with questions. What now? What else could possibly be left to discover? When I entered the living room, my father was sitting in his favorite chair, staring out the window. His face was ashen, his eyes bloodshot. He didn't look like the man I had always known. He looked older, defeated. The weight of the world seemed to be pressing down on him. "Sit down," he said softly, gesturing to the seat across from him. "We need to talk." I sat down slowly, unsure of what to expect. My father had never been one to openly express his emotions, and the somber tone in his voice only made me more anxious. I know you've been looking through Grandpa's things, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. And I know you found the letter. You need to understand something. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my nerves. What do you mean? What letter? He glanced at me, his eyes full of regret. The one you found in his study. It's not just a letter, it's a warning. Grandpa left it for you because he knew what was coming. He knew that our family would be targeted, and he needed you to be prepared. Targeted by who? I asked, my voice shaking. What do you mean? My father stood up, pacing the room, his hands clenched into fists. It's not just about Sarah's mistake. It's about something much bigger. There are people who want the family's wealth, and they'll stop at nothing to get it. I felt a cold chill crawl up my spine. Who are these people? What do they want? He stopped pacing and turned to face me, his face full of fear. I can't tell you everything, but I can tell you this. Grandpa's wealth wasn't just money, it was power. And there are people who will do whatever it takes to take that power away from us. You're in danger now, and there's no turning back. The room seemed to close in on me. I had never imagined that something as simple as an inheritance could lead to this. Threats, danger, and betrayal. The stakes were higher than I could have ever imagined, and I was no longer just a passive recipient of Grandpa's fortune. I was now at the center of a battle I didn't understand, and I had no idea who to trust. Your mother and I have been trying to protect you, my father continued, his voice heavy with guilt. But we can't do it alone. You need to be careful. There are forces at play that we can't control. I nodded, my mind spinning. Everything had changed. What started as a simple will reading had turned into a nightmare, and I had no idea how to survive it. Just then, the doorbell rang again. This time, I didn't hesitate. I knew something was coming, something that would change everything. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. The doorbell's ring shattered the heavy silence that had settled in the room. My heart was racing, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread settle over me. I had no idea what was waiting on the other side of that door, but after everything that had already happened, I wasn't sure I was ready for whatever it was. My father and mother exchanged nervous glances before my father stood up, motioning for me to stay where I was. Stay here, he said firmly, his voice low but urgent. I'll see who it is. I nodded, though a part of me wanted to follow him. The last few days had been a blur of confusion and unease, and now this, whatever was on the other side of that door, could change everything. I didn't feel safe anymore, not in my own home, not with the weight of Grandpa's legacy and the dangerous people lurking in the shadows. My father moved cautiously toward the door, his hand resting on the doorknob. There was a pause, a stillness, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Then my father opened the door. At first, I couldn't see who was standing there. But when my father stepped aside, I saw the figure, tall, wearing a dark suit and a fedora that obscured their face. I froze, my blood running cold. Something about this person felt wrong, off. The figure stood there, silent for a moment, as though studying my father and the house behind him. I'm looking for your name, the figure said, their voice smooth, almost mechanical. I immediately felt a chill run down my spine. I had no idea who this person was, but I could tell that whatever they wanted was not good. I glanced nervously at my parents, but they seemed just as tense and wary as I was. I am your father's name, my father said, his voice tight with suspicion. What is this about? The stranger didn't respond right away. Instead, they removed the fedora, revealing a sharp, calculating gaze. It was a face I didn't recognize, but the look in their eyes was all too familiar. Danger, manipulation, and something far more sinister. I'm here to speak to your child, the figure said, their gaze locking with mine as they stepped into the foyer, not waiting for an invitation. My father's hand shot out, his voice suddenly filled with authority. No one enters without explanation. What is this about? The stranger didn't flinch. I'm just a messenger, and I'm here to deliver a warning. There are forces you don't fully understand, and if you continue down this path, you'll regret it. I felt my knees weaken, but I didn't speak. What could I say? What did I know about the forces they were talking about? Was this related to the warning Grandpa had left in his letter? And why was this person so intent on speaking to me? We don't need threats, my father replied, his voice hardening. Leave. But the stranger didn't budge. Instead, they reached into their coat pocket and pulled out a small, folded envelope. They handed it to me, their eyes never leaving mine. I suggest you read this before making any more decisions, the figure said, their voice cold and final. Then, without another word, they turned on their heel and walked out of the door, disappearing into the night just as quickly as they had arrived. I stood frozen in place, my hand trembling as I took the envelope from the stranger. My father immediately closed the door, locking it with a finality that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. What was that? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My mother walked over to me, her expression pale. I don't know, but I don't like it. My father shook his head. No one comes to our door like that, giving warnings and cryptic messages. This is exactly what we've been afraid of. Whoever that was, they knew too much. I stared at the envelope in my hands. The thick, weighty paper seemed innocuous enough, but everything about the situation screamed danger. My mind was racing. Should I open it? What could possibly be inside? Dad, Mom, should I open this? I asked, my voice shaky. My father hesitated, his brow furrowing as he looked at the envelope. You don't know what's inside. I think it's time we take this to the lawyer, figure out what's really going on here. It's too risky to deal with this alone. But something inside me resisted. Grandpa's letter, his warning. I couldn't ignore it. I knew deep down that this was the moment where everything would either spiral out of control or take a turn for the better. I had to know what was in that envelope. "Give me a moment," I said softly. My voice had a newfound determination. I needed to understand what was happening, and if this envelope was part of the puzzle, then I had to open it. Without waiting for my parents to stop me, I carefully peeled the envelope open. The paper inside was smooth, almost luxurious in texture, but it wasn't just a simple letter. There was a note and a photograph. I unfolded the note first. "If you want to understand the truth, you must go to the place where everything started. Time is running out. They're already on their way. Don't trust anyone." I read the message several times, trying to make sense of it. But nothing made sense. What place? What truth? Who were they? And why were they coming for me? I looked at the photograph next, and my heart skipped a beat. It was an old photo, black and white, depicting a group of people standing in front of a large, sprawling mansion. I recognized the faces immediately: Grandpa, my parents, and Sarah. But there was someone else in the picture, a man standing at the back. He was tall, with piercing eyes and a cold smile, his presence unsettling. I had never seen him before, but something about his expression made my blood run cold. "Who is this?" I whispered, almost to myself. My father came over, his eyes narrowing as he saw the photograph. "No, this can't be." He muttered something under his breath, then turned to my mother. "This is the man. The one I've been trying to protect you from. He's connected to everything. He's the reason this is happening." The room fell into a thick, suffocating silence. I could feel the weight of my father's words, the terror behind them. Who is this man? And what did he have to do with Grandpa's fortune? "Dad, what do we do now?" I asked, my voice barely audible. My father took a deep breath, his face pale. "Now we find out exactly what Grandpa was hiding, and we get ready for what's coming."